This is a 17-inch MacBook Pro from 2006, an absolutely massive laptop. It's in pretty good condition considering everything it's been through, but it wasn't always that way. When I got it in my last video, it was partially destroyed. In this video, I'm going to show you how I fixed the largest MacBook Apple ever made. It's missing some hinge screws and case screws. We also need to put a drive, an optical drive, and oh, it's falling backwards. We don't want that. Oh, let's just convert it into a dual screen laptop. Look at this, guys. It's the future. So let's fire this machine up, make sure it works again before I go taking it all apart. So I'll install the original hard drive that came with my black MacBook. Good. It works still. There's damage to the outer case, and the hinge is missing like half a dozen screws, making it unable to hold its position, so there's a lot that needs fixing on this MacBook. Before I can bend the aluminum frame back into place, because it definitely needs it, I first have to take out the logic board and all the internal components. I started with the 8 connectors on the logic board, plus the clock battery. That shot totally isn't out of focus. To remove the logic board, there's a fair amount of screws that need to be taken out, some of which were missing, but I made sure to label which screws went where to prevent disaster later down the road when I went to put it back together. I'll put affiliate links to these containers and everything else I used in this video in the description. Buying from those links really helps the channel. I'm also curious how the thermal paste has held up after 16 years. I had trouble getting the logic board to come out until I realized there was an extra connector on the bottom after it came out with little effort. Oh, and that instantly revealed the thermal paste. The thermal paste was changed recently, but not by me. Otherwise, it wouldn't have this consistency if it was 16 years old. Next to come out was the airport card. We got a little bit of dust back here. I continued disassembling and labeling. There we go. This is the entire left speaker assembly for this computer. We got long boy and thick boy, I guess. They probably sound quite terrible, but for the time I bet they were pretty good. We'll see about that later in the video though. There goes the left I/O board. You know, MacBooks used to have expansion slots. That's what this is, an expansion slot. The computer is starting to look pretty empty. The only thing left is the cooling assembly. A few screws and it was out. So that revealed quite a bit of dust. And next goes the screen. Now I don't have a laptop, I just have a pile of spare parts. There's no computer here. It's just a shell. A very dusty and dirty shell. That's not my fingernail. I wanted to inspect the hinge for damage, and it appears one of the sides is loose. My guess is that it's gone bad, so I guess I'll just have to live with the screen giving up and committing fall backwards. I'm not going to replace the hinge today. So now that I have the computer in pieces, it's time to give it a good clean, because it definitely needs it. I've got rubbing alcohol in one and water in the other, and together they're going to clean the internals of this computer. Let's do it. Let's see how much of a difference one swipe makes. A huge difference, and a lot of dirt as well. Wow. Okay, I admit I spent about a half an hour cleaning the inside of the case, but it does look a lot cleaner now, but not 30 minutes of my life cleaner. I mean, there's barely a difference. The ports were also dirty, but I still don't see how this could have possibly taken me a half an hour. So now we can move on to some other components, just, you know, the speaker, random components. Give it a couple good sprays. Yeah. Content. See, this is the type of content you ought to be subscribing to my channel for. I cleaned the I/O board, front and back. The ports weren't too bad except for the MagSafe. There was a coating that was coming off, so I just peeled it the rest of the way. Hopefully it wasn't serving any purpose. And now for the logic board. I'll take that thermal paste off, give the logic board a good cleaning. And the ports needed a little bit of attention too, but both sides look bright and shiny. Again, another clean component that nobody sees. But it's not all for nothing, because more cleaner equals more performance. Totally. Last up is the heatsink. Away goes the thermal paste, and in the fan, surprisingly little dust, by the way. There is a bunch of dust here, but I was expecting just caked in dust with the amount of just debris that was in this machine. It's weird how these fans look plasticky, but that's obviously metal. I opened up the other fan, found more dust, and something unexpected. What is this? There's just a random screw stuck in the fan. So maybe I found one of the dozens and dozens of missing screws for this machine. Just assuring the other ones aren't all jammed in here as well. That would save me a lot of trouble. After cleaning the surprisingly dust-free fans, I reassembled them. I was ready to attempt bending the laptop case back to how it's supposed to be. It's pretty banged up after all. So I'll take a paper towel, fold it up as not to damage the aluminum, with the pliers that I'm going to try to bend it back into shape with. Might have done a little bit of damage to that clip there, but there's definitely a big difference. The damage to the clip was pretty hard to avoid. It'll still do its job. I moved on to the much worse damage near the ports. It required more attention not to completely smash the plastic around the bent aluminum. Honestly, with how banged up this case is, I'm surprised that plastic hasn't been damaged at all. Until now, I actually cracked it a little bit. Not badly though. Nothing a little super glue can't fix. I did the finer adjustments with my hands. It turned out well. A much bigger difference than the other fix. There's still a bit of a divot, but once the laptop's reassembled, you have to be looking pretty close to notice. I also noticed little bits of plastic kept appearing. I realized they were coming from the rear air intake. Without them, the plastic would likely come off entirely. Not a very strong design, but this Mac is from before the famously durable unibody MacBooks. For an old machine like this, little random parts you find probably serve a purpose somewhere because they're probably breaking off of somewhere important. I super glued them back on. Now the super glue is doing most of the heavy lifting, and I guess those plastic pieces are just kind of glued on. There's a second kind that pokes into a hole. I super glued that there too, but I don't know how well that worked. To prevent any from breaking off in the future, I covered all of them with super glue. This should fix the problem. And it's also probably stronger than the original plastic anyway. Hours later, I was getting ready to put the computer back together when I noticed more broken plastic. Nothing a bit of super glue can't fix. Cleaning off the extra, the job was done. Here on this wood platter, I have the entire computer. It's gonna have to go back in there now. And let's just hope all these components still function as intended. We'll start with the heatsink. And again, luckily I was labeling the screws as I go. After the heatsink goes the left I/O board. 4 screws and now the speaker, some screws, 2 connectors, and the airport card. Placing in the left speaker, we can move to the thermal paste. Giving the dies another clean just before the thermal paste application is always recommended. And here goes the thermal paste. Such content this is. Are you subscribed yet? And I know it's not necessary, but I like to spread it out myself, especially because this logic board is mounted upside down. Cleaning off the extra strands, we can now put the board in the computer. Except there's a problem. I just realized that I forgot to plug this little cable in because it plugs in under the logic board. The other side plugs in right there. Obviously you can't see where it plugs in because it's under everything I just connected. So I had to undo all the work I just did because of a cable. But after all of that, it was finally time for the logic board. The port's going first, obviously. And you've got to double check that all the connectors are on the correct side. You wouldn't want to smash any of them. And I noticed the logic board wasn't lying completely flat. At first I thought I did something wrong, but I realized that the logic board is just bent. The oh so problematic cable can be plugged in, and now I have to redo what I just undid. The speaker and the airport card. Now for the logic board screws, putting all 12 back in, making sure to screw gradually all around the board. This is so there can be even pressure on the CPU dies, which is best. Well, apart from this, that just sits in there, and then there's the clock battery. The only thing left to do for this laptop is to turn it into a laptop by putting the screen on. It's starting to look like a laptop, guys. Next go the hinge screws. Remember how the screen was all fall backwardsy? Yeah, it only came with 3 of the 10 screws. I managed to find some that would work, or at least they help. They're not perfect. It's got a random assortment of screws in it, some from that screenless MacBook and others from just screws I had lying around, but it works better than anything else could. The last thing you do is reattach the connectors, connect the hard drive, and we should have a working computer. Yes, it does. It would appear I probably do know what I'm doing after all. After knowing it still turns on, thankfully, I wanted to get a working CD drive, because this computer doesn't have one. I tried the one from the non-working 15-inch MacBook Pro, and it turns out it's not compatible. Neither is the one from the white MacBook. Well, I tried. It'll just be empty. That's a shame. I guess there's no playing my Fire tunes. Subscribe. Now I've got to find a dozen or more specifically sized screws to put the computer back together. Remember, it was missing all of those when I got it. Before doing that, I tried putting the keyboard on so it's flush with the bottom case. I found another problem. The hard drive cable was bent at an odd angle, preventing the case from sitting as it should. I found an image online of how it should be and fixed it. It's also supposed to be attached to the drive with some heat-resistant Captain tape. I don't have any of that, so some good old scotch I have to do. Now it's time to see if the screws I have work. They do! These are from the battery compartment of that white MacBook that doesn't work. Thankfully, there's tons of them, so there'll be more than enough to use. Midway through screwing, I noticed that 2 of the brackets were missing on the top case. These are where the threads are for the screws. Luckily, the broken ones are spaced 1 apart, so this is basically the best it could have turned out to be. The other side took all the screws nicely. Screws for the bottom of the white MacBook work near the RAM. At least they work if you don't screw them too tight. That's what happens to the keyboard if you screw them too tight. Oh yeah, and nothing seems to work at the back of the computer. I had to take it all apart again, and then I realized the threads for those are gone too. Then I also noticed another standoff for screws at the bottom of the computer was broken too. Oh yeah, and then I taped the clock battery down so there was no rattling. More of the same screws worked in the battery compartment, but I only found 2 screws that would work in the bottom. It's good enough. Thankfully, my janky assortment of screws works to hold this MacBook together. But there's one more thing wrong. That's rattling. That's because there's no hard drive bracket, because they didn't come with hard drives when I got them. So I'm going to have to figure out a way to fix that. My solution? Cutting foam to stick in the gap. I acquired the necessary measurements, drew an outline, and gave the foam a slice. Getting it to the right size, reinforcing with tape, it fits perfectly. The drive barely moves now. And now that the rattle's gone, See? Nothing. We can now install macOS Lion. Going through the setup screen to start the install, I can now move the computer out of the way so I can work on other projects. Oh no. The machine decided to kernel panic. I don't know if it was because I moved it, I was being gentle, but either way, the install eventually was successful. Now we can set up the operating system. The best part is taking a dorky profile photo. Yeah, look at this nerd. And now we've got it. It's just been set up. It works. Before we do anything else, it's time to give this Mac a final cleaning. Clean the top, bottom, sides, keyboard. The palm rest was especially dirty. There was even grime between the display bezels. Not anymore. Last is the screen, and now I have a clean machine. Please don't unsubscribe because of my bad rhyme. So it turns out this machine has a 2.33 GHz Intel Core 2 Duo and only 2 gigs of RAM at 667 MHz. It is, after all, from 2006, which was a while ago. But now let's see what this machine can do. Trine was the first game I tried. It didn't run at all on that black MacBook, but it runs on this one just fine, or at least, you know, kind of. Of course, because I'm a real gamer, I cranked the settings to the max, so this is probably why there's some of those, you know, FPS issues. Of course, this computer can also play Solitaire. Next up is Air Attack. It's always a fun game to try. I played it a lot as a child, a lot of gamer raging. Of course, I ran it on max settings, just like I did Braid, and it ran great as well. But a game that doesn't run well is Torchlight. At least, it doesn't start up well. It took 55 seconds to load into the game from Finder. 55 seconds. Now, of course, this is due to the hard drive being a hard drive instead of an SSD, but I'm not Lord Linus of the tech tips, and I can't afford just buying SSDs all the time. And if you want to support this channel and maybe so I can buy more SSDs in the future, you can become a channel member for $1 a month. New videos every week. I try to make it the best value. Please, if you want to. But let's try some photo editing in the good old Pixelmator. Now, I use Pixelmator Pro these days, but this is the OG version. Just Pixelmator. Plain old Pixelmator. But I was able to make a quite lovely image. iBig, face zoom. Of course, you have to write out the subscribe text. And of course, the image wouldn't be complete without jacking up the saturation and brightness. Ah, yes, what a beautiful image. Just like me. The keyboard is great to type on. I tried an old typing practice application, and I was able to get decent words per minute. 117 words a minute. Not bad. I'm typing a little bit slower than I usually would because I'm not quite used to this keyboard, but the keyboard really is quite nice to type on. But one thing about the keyboard is I didn't realize it had a backlight until days into filming this video when it randomly decided to turn on. Yeah. This entire time, the backlight just wasn't working. No reason. Nothing changed. It just decided to work. Except it doesn't work right now. So I guess the backlight will work whenever it feels like it. The trackpad is basically the same as the common white MacBooks from this era. It's usable, not the best, but better than the Chromebook's trackpad I had in school, which isn't saying much. The internet speeds are slow as expected. That's the max this airport card can handle. But what's sad is until recently, very recently, this is as fast as I could possibly get at where I live. Thank God for 5G hotspots. But what about the camera? You know, the camera doesn't look too bad here, but that's because I have a great big video light, giving it the best possible chance to look halfway decent. Also, it's quite laggy, and the fans are going basically all the way. No latency there, totally. The display is okay, the bezels aren't too big, and the viewing angles are good. But there are some spots because of aging. It's a pretty good display, and I was pleasantly surprised. I thought it would be worse than it is. Oh, and one of the 3 USB ports doesn't work for some reason. See the light? It doesn't turn on. But apart from that, the port selection is great. Full-size DVI, Ethernet, FireWire 800 and 400, MagSafe, mic out, headphone jack, and an Express card expansion slot. Oh, and the speakers? They're also better than I was expecting. They are loud. Yeah, I guess you had to be there. Okay, the speakers barely have any bass. They're not amazing, but they're better than iPhone speakers. But this MacBook really did impress me because I thought it was going to be a lot worse than it was, just quality-wise, considering it's 17 years old. I know my smart brain has been saying 16 years old this entire video, but apparently I forgot that 2006 is actually 17 years ago, and the year is 2023 and not 2022, because smart brain. Oh yeah, and I didn't put a battery in it because those cost money. And I'm not going to spend more money than I have to on my videos because budget constraints. But if you want to help me spend more money on my videos, you can become a channel member for $1 a month. And each week you'll get an extra video. And this week's extra video is playing Lego Indiana Jones on this MacBook. So we'll see how that went. Become a channel member today. Watch it now if you're a channel member. But thanks so much for watching a new video next week. Every single Saturday. A video for everyone and a video for channel members. As always, have a great day. Goodbye, everyone.